Chapter 7. A few days passed after that terrible night. Time seemed meaningless. Melody felt as though she wasn't living her old life. She was living someone else's life in someone else's body, and it was a nightmare. After forging her husband's signature on the release form to have a therapeutic abortion at the Western Lake Hospital, she finally took courage and walked to the reception area to hand-deliver it. The receptionist was laughing about something as she talked with a coworker. Melody stood at the desk, waiting for help. Finally, she turned her way. "Can I help you?" she smiled. "My doctor asked me to bring this form in." Melody handed her the carefully folded paper. The lady opened it, and a frown crossed her face. She looked at Melody with a seemingly sympathetic expression and said, "We will contact you with a date for surgery as soon as it is decided." With that, Melody turned away and walked slowly back to her apartment. Within a few days, the telephone rang, announcing the results. "Hello, this is Western Lake Hospital calling for Melody Wolfe. Is this Melody?" "That is me," Melody said quietly. She was glad the call came during the day, when she was alone in the apartment. "Is this Melody Wolfe?" the hospital representative insisted. "Yes," Melody repeated. "Okay, Mrs. Wolfe, we have you slated for a therapeutic abortion on Friday, November 15th at 10 a.m. We are mailing you a sheet of instructions to prepare yourself. Please do not eat or drink anything after 6 p.m. the night before your surgery. If everything goes as planned, you can leave within 3 to 6 hours post-surgery. Thank you." The line clicked dead, not waiting for a response from her. Melody was still holding the receiver in her hand and thinking about what would happen 10 days from today. She didn't talk to Richard about the upcoming surgery. In fact, they didn't speak about the situation again since that first horrible night. Richard made sure to work extra overtime hours instead of going home because he didn't want to face his wife. He alternated from extreme anger at her and a desire to go and find this guy that had impregnated his young wife and shoot him dead with his .22 shotgun. How could she do this to him? Who was she, anyway? He felt he didn't know her at all. No, it was better not to think about it and just keep his hands in the guts of the aircraft engine. "Turn the music louder, Willie," Richard commanded. He didn't want to hear his thoughts playing in his head. "Having my baby. Do-do-do-do. What a wonderful way of saying how much you love me. Do-do-do-do. Having my baby. Wouldn't make you keep it. Wouldn't put you through it. You could have swept it all away, but you wouldn't do it. No, you wouldn't do it. Do-do-do-do. And now you're having my baby." The lyrics on the current popular hit song were taunting him. "Shut that music off," Richard yelled at Willie. "What's the matter with you, man? First you want it on, and then you want it off." Willie rubbed his greasy hands on his coverall legs, and shaking his head from side to side, walked back into the hangar to turn the radio off. Finally, it was the day before her scheduled abortion. Melody had read the medical instructions thoroughly. It all seemed so matter-of-fact, so impersonal. There were no real details about what it would be like. Just a lot of medical legalese and mumbo-jumbo that didn't mean much to her. She was supposed to be at the hospital at 7 a.m. for prep, even though the surgery was only slated for 10. That night, while soaking in a hot bath, Melody wished she could talk to someone, but she was alone. After drying off, she crawled under the cold covers, alone. Richard was still working late at the airport. She knew she could tell no one because it would risk her personal privacy and reputation, not to mention Richard's. No one would want to talk to her anyway about this. If her family knew back home, they would be so ashamed of her. Salty tears began to roll silently down her cheeks. "Oh God, where are you? I'm such a mess. I feel so alone, so guilty." She laid her cold hands on her warm abdomen, just beneath her belly button. After a long while she whispered, "I'm so sorry, little one, but I just can't keep you." Deep inside Melody's womb, a tiny hand thrust a minute finger into a wee mouth. A serene little face with closed eyes connected to a miniature body which wiggled gently in a salty sea of warm water, much like the warm waterbed mattress under the giant body surrounding her. The miraculous fusion of sperm and egg weeks ago had erupted into countless cells, forming an embryo and then a fetus. At 13 weeks gestation, this being was only 3 inches long, yet totally formed. If Melody could have peered into the aquarium scene through a window beneath her belly button, she would have been amazed at the transparent body of her forming baby. It revealed a living, pulsating heart with rapid, unheard heartbeats. Electronic brain waves were flashing back and forth like lightning in her little brain. She sensed that something was making her feel insecure, even afraid. Joseph stood beside the sleeping form of his charge. His right wing was stretched across the lower half of Melody's body. Ebony felt warmth penetrating her very spirit, and the fear in her little heart melted away. She listened to the familiar strains of music from that heavenly place she'd once known. Joseph, the angelic protector, knew things were about to get worse. Father wanted to comfort the innocent one named Ebony before her final suffering. Her mother lay curled up in a fetal position with dry tear streaks staining her flushed cheeks. "The consequences of sin is death, but I came so that you might choose life. Have life and choose life, so that you and your descendants might live." The Holy Scripture resonated in Joseph's heart. "Melody, it's not too late to change your mind. Please, Father, help me stop the devil's plan," he prayed silently. "It's her choice. I gave her that freedom at her creation," the father answered in response, and Joseph noted the distinct sadness in his voice. The next morning dawned sunny at 6 a.m. Melody was awake with the first light of dawn. She felt a cramp in her stomach. Sitting up in bed, she looked over at the sleeping form of Richard under a pile of covers. "Why is it so sunny outside when I feel so dark inside?" Melody thought to herself. "I hate this day." She went downstairs and opened the back door to the back porch. A big, furry tabby cat was sitting there with a torn bag of wet garbage, which had been left out for 2 days. "Meow!" The tabby looked up at Melody as if to say, "Can I have some milk with my breakfast?" What a torn mess! Melody pushed the cat away with her bare foot. "Shoo! Go, cat! Why did you make such a mess?" Melody didn't realize that this was a picture premonition of the torn mess that was soon to happen in her day. After drinking a small glass of milk to soothe her aching stomach, Melody went to her room. She opened a drawer and took out a pair of jeans and a loose navy shirt. She dressed quickly and went quietly to the bathroom to wash and do her hair, deciding to twist it into 2 long braids so that it would be out of the way during the surgery. Somehow the time passed, and at 6:45 a.m., Melody donned a warm jacket and left the apartment. Richard was still fast asleep. Melody would have to face this all alone. She walked the short distance over a small park and then onto the pavement of the Western Lake General. Then she was there, announcing her presence to the receptionist. It only took a couple of minutes for the nurse to come and invite her to follow her to a small green room with a light pink curtain pulled aside to reveal a single bed. "Put your clothes on a pile on this chair," the nurse indicated where. "Then put that nightgown on with the opening to the front." She left and closed the door behind her decidedly. Melody did as she was told and laid down on the bed. She felt so cold, so she pulled a thin knitted hospital blanket up over her body. After a while, a different nurse returned. She was older and had a grumpy expression on her face as she looked Melody over. Then, without a word, she sat down and yanked the rubber band ends of her braids, almost violently. "You can't have that nail polish on for the surgery," she retorted. Taking out a cotton swab and some alcohol remover from a cupboard on the wall, she said, "Take it off." Melody obliged, feeling hurt at the sour attitude of this woman. She waited for what seemed an eternity till 2 more nurses came in with a special rolling kind of bed. "Climb up here," a brunette instructed. Melody swung her legs over and got into a very narrow bed. Then she was being rolled through the door and down a hall, around corners, until finally they put her on the side of a hall next to a big double door with a sign that read, "Do not enter. Surgery. Sterile." She stared at the ceiling as she waited. The bright ceiling lights shone down into her dilated pupils. Finally, a man came out of the surgery room wearing a green face mask, till his nose and cap with an elastic around his head. All she could see were his dark green eyes, which matched his green scrubs. He bent over Melody. "Don't worry, honey. This will all be over very soon," he said in a calming voice. "I'm the anesthesiologist for you today." Melody wanted to ask him some questions, but nothing came out. He patted her arm reassuringly as he took the bed and began to wheel it into the surgery. Then she was surrounded by strangers, all in the same kind of clothing. They looked like a circle of green alien beings. Someone put a needle into Melody's arm and told her to count backwards from 10. 10, 9. She barely began, and that was all she remembered. Joseph continued to bring comfort to wee Ebony as long as he could until there was no return with a progressing abortion. Ebony felt something like a wave, and then a prick of light shone into the warm amniotic fluid around her. Then a long, hard edge began to move sharply back and forth inside her safe place. Trying to keep out of its way, Ebony wanted to scream, but her tiny mouth was frozen in shock as the knife edge grasped her delicate leg, and a horrible yank ripped it from her tiny body. Outside lay the body of her mother, Melody, unconscious to the whirring sound of the suction machine, drowning out every other noise. The doctor intently and methodically continued scraping his instrument back and forth as a pink mulching substance began to flow through the clear attached tube. Then the substance became decidedly red, and lumpy sounds added to the sucking, swallowing vacuum. The 2 nurses who were assisting Dr. Belmont wore a grim expression behind their masks, especially on the face of the brunette nurse who had helped Melody during prep. "Why do I have to be part of this again?" Bernice thought angrily to herself. "These foolish young people, screwing around and getting themselves into trouble, and then I have to help them have the procedure. What would my pastor think if he knew?" There were far too many abortions since Roe v. Wade's decision in the United States in 1973. More and more every week. If a person refused to go along with it, then they could lose their job. Whatever happened to the doctor's oath? First, do no harm. Therapeutic abortion, indeed. Joseph was there when the tiny spirit of Ebony lifted up and melted through the fleshly womb of her mother. A giant hand appeared and scooped her up gently, then whisked her into the safety of another realm. Melody woke up hours later in a recovery room. The blind was pulled and a dim light glowed above her head. There was an IV hooked up in her hand. She felt pain in her bottom, and then she remembered. There was a thick pad stuck between her legs and attached with strings to her hips and buttocks. She was wearing a cotton hospital gown and laying on her side, covered with blankets. After a while, a nurse came in to check on her. "How are you feeling now?" she asked. My head feels kind of heavy, Melody said thickly. That is the after effect of the anesthetic, the nurse explained as she checked the bleeding on Melody's pad and then her pulse. I'll send Dr. Belmont in to see you, and then you can leave soon. The doctor came in shortly, carrying her chart. Melody looked up into his face and asked, Doctor, can I see my baby? She had the idea that even though an abortion had taken place, there would be a small body to see. No, that's not possible. Dr. Belmont looked surprised at her question. We have sent parts of it off to Kamloops for testing. Parts? What do you mean, parts? Melody tried to understand his meaning. No one had explained the abortion procedure to her. She did not know what had really happened to her or to the preborn child. The doctor gave no further explanation. You can leave in an hour or so, as soon as you feel up to sitting, he went on. Watch for any heavy bleeding and take it easy for a few days. He left the room. Melody began to think about the word parts. Parts? And it was a repetitive ringing in her ears. Richard knew what had happened to his wife that morning. He had known from the moment she got up, before he did. He simply stayed in bed with his eyes closed. He was trying to pray, but it seemed that heaven was brass. After she left, he had forced himself to go to work. But even though he tried, he might as well have stayed at home for all the work he accomplished. Deep down in his heart, he felt as though he was somehow a part of this. But that's not true, he argued with his conscience. She got herself into this mess. It's not my fault. The hours ticked by. He called the hospital to ask when Melody Wolfe was ready to leave. Are you the husband? The nurse queried. Yes, I am, Richard said. She's ready to leave now, the nurse told him. You can come and pick her up any time. He left work quickly and headed down the winding mountain road into town. As Richard walked the cold, tiled floors of the hospital halls, he felt a coldness in his heart. He tried not to think. He came to room 343 and pushed open the door. There she was, lying with her back to him under a thin blanket. Melody? He asked softly. She moaned, and he walked closer. They say you're ready to go home now. Melody opened her eyes and looked at him. Something caught in Richard's throat as he looked in her eyes. There was a change there. She looked like a tortured little bird. Oh, what have I allowed? Richard asked himself in sudden remorse. You haven't done anything, another voice cut in quickly, and the thought passed. That's right, I haven't. It's all over now. We'll just get on with our lives, he consoled himself. He helped Melody sit up on the side of her bed. She was already dressed, so he put her jacket over her shoulders and helped her find her shoes. Then, leaning heavily on his arm, he walked her out of the hospital. She was pale, looking down as they went across the parking lot. That night, as Melody slept beside him, Richard knew that they had had a turning point in their marriage. He was determined to forget about this tragedy and go on with his life. Melody slept fitfully. She was dreaming about the little baby she had said goodbye to the other night. Then, in her dream, she heard the word, parts. She woke up with a start. It was dark. She felt the pad between her legs, and she knew it wasn't a dream. It was true. She really had had an abortion. At that moment, Melody decided to build a big wall around her emotions and her heart to protect herself. She simply wouldn't think about it any more. The next few days melted into weeks. Melody felt as though she was living in a haze. Nothing really penetrated into her thoughts. She was unattached, unemotional, just going about her daily duties as a matter of routine. Deep down inside her heart, a boil of anger festered. Richard had told her to decide between the baby and him. She had decided to keep her marriage. So this boil was made up of blame, blaming Richard for forcing her into an abortion. The boil was red, festering. It burned in her stomach, making it feel sour. But on the surface, Melody acted cool. No worries. One day the phone rang. Ring, ring. I'm coming. Melody wiped her wet hands across her apron. She went to pick up the phone attached to a long curled cord. Hello? Hi, it's me. Melody knew that voice. Her heart sank. Oh, hi, Brent. Long time no talk, Brent said lightly. Yes, it's been a while. Melody didn't help things move along. Yeah, I'm sorry I haven't called sooner. Brent swallowed the big lump in his throat. I've been doing a lot of thinking. He paused, and when Melody didn't say anything, he went on. I felt really bad about what you told me the last time, Melody, and I finally got up the courage to talk to my parents about it. And guess what? What? Melody couldn't help herself. My parents said they would be willing to raise the baby. So you don't have to have that abortion, Melody. Phew, he'd said it. It was out. Oh, Melody's voice seemed almost gone. It's too late, Brent. What do you mean? Brent asked. I mean, it's over. I had the abortion. There is no baby anymore. Brent heard the sadness in her voice. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I took too long to call you back. Yes, I guess you did. Melody's voice sounded bitter now. Goodbye, Brent. She hung up the phone. In Vancouver, Brent also hung up the payphone. He stood staring at it for a while as cold raindrops began to splash on the glass booth. Then the sound of a taxi horn woke him up, and he left to return to his apartment. Brent decided to go visit his parents. He was depressed about the call to Melody, and he knew going over there might help. Hi, Mom. He walked in to see his mother standing at the stove, stirring something. She was wearing one of her favorite floral-printed muumuus from back home. The bright red hibiscus flower stood out against the yellow background of the cotton fabric. Hi, son. Come on in. I'm just making a stew, and it's almost done. Did you make it with leeks and cassava roots like in Fiji, Mom? Brent's mouth was watering wistfully. Yes, dear. Nothing like our own ethnic recipes. If only we could get fresh mango like the tree we had in our backyard in Fiji. The tropical fruits we buy here in Vancouver aren't as big or ripe, and they just don't taste as good. I sure miss all our friends and family. I hope we can afford to fly home for a visit this year. Mom was scooping a big bowl of the steaming stew to offer to Brent. She turned around to see him sitting with his face between his hands at the kitchen table. What's the matter, son? Mom always knew his moods better than anyone. I finally got the nerve to make that call to Melody, Brent said with a sigh. There. It was out. So how did it go? Suni's eyes raised. Her eyebrows raised. She knew what her son was talking about. They had a close relationship. Well, it didn't go well, Mum. She said it was too late, Brent finished. Oh, I'm so sorry, dear. Suni sat down beside him and began to stroke his black, wavy hair, just like she used to do when he was a little boy. She didn't know what else to say. She had prayed so hard about this. Now it sounded like the young lady had gone through with that abortion. I don't know why I feel so bad, Brent said almost angrily as he stirred his stew. It's just that a long tear began to trickle down his face. Since Naomi left me with our son, I feel so lost and hopeless. The whole thing was a terrible mistake. Brent, you should make things right with Naomi. She needs you to be a husband to her and a father to your son. Why don't you go after her and ask her to forgive you? Suni counseled. What do you mean, forgive me? Brent said indignantly. She's the one who cheated on me, remember? Yes, I remember, son. Suni shook her head sadly. Now look what you've done to this other woman's marriage. You have done exactly the same thing to her husband that your wife did to you. She hated to say it, but Brent must be made to see his wrong if there was any hope of him taking responsibility for his actions. That is not how your father and I raised you, son. We raised you to know the difference between right and wrong. I don't want to listen to this. Brent pushed his stew away. I came here because I thought you, of all people, would understand, Mom. Don't preach to me about your religion either, because it's not mine, you know. I am a Fijian, Mom. Our ancestors had their own gods, and I don't believe in the white man's Christian God. Brent almost spat the words out before he hurried out the door, slamming it carelessly. Suni put her head down on the table and wept for her son. Dear Father, please help my son. Reveal yourself to him before it's too late, she prayed.